This session today with Marsha is about how to read the room and change the outcome. So my question for you as we begin is relating to reading the room. Have you got this on the left-hand side, or are you kind of the person that slinks away and that's not my thing? So when it comes to reading the room, have you got this on the left or less so on the right? Vote with a left click on that interactive panel that's appeared on your screen. We'll see how it looks. Oh, it's an even split, Marsha. Look at that. Okay.
Nice.
All right, so that's relating to reading the room. What about when it comes to changing the outcome? Again, left-hand side, you've got Falcor the Luck Dragon from Neverending Story. I've got that represents I've got this, I'm confident, yes. Or on the right-hand side, the cat's like, no, I haven't got this. When it comes to changing the outcome once you've read the room. Okay, a few more people in the middle this time. Well, folks, I imagine Marsha is going to share with you some really interesting things that will help you improve at changing the outcome even further, improve at reading the room even further. For awareness, we're going to have some time towards the end for questions. If you think of them, feel free to drop them in the chat so you don't forget, and we can come back to them a little bit later. I'm pleased to welcome Marsha Acker to join us today. I've told you what the topic's about. Marsha's got a new book that you can see in the background up there, and also a very color-coordinated room that I reflected on in a private chat with her beforehand. We're going to go into structural dynamics, all sorts of interesting stuff today. I'm completely fascinated by this as a passionate facilitator. Marsha will do a better introduction than I will, so I'm going to hand over to Marsha to share her screen and to wow us all. Over to you, Marsha. Thank you.
Thanks, Christopher. I'm fascinated by this platform that we're in, so we'll see, how well this goes. Okay. In theory, you'll be seeing my slides.
We can see your slides.
You can see my slides. I can't tell that you can see my slides. That's okay. Give me just a second to figure out. Okay. Yeah, so as Christopher said, I'm going to lay down some things for you, and then I'd really love to make it a bit more of an interactive conversation as we get to the latter half. So I'm really curious, by a show of hands, and I know not everybody is on video, so maybe there's a way that you can click and just indicate. But I'm curious about how many of you have ever had the frustration of having the same conversation over and over and over again at work or at home. Yeah, so okay, so there go some hands. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So I like to call these Groundhog Day conversations. And I think the risk of some of these conversations is that they're often missing something in the structure or a pattern, if you like, that keeps repeating itself, leaving participants, all of those of us who are in that conversation, kind of stuck in a way that we're not able to move forward in a productive way. So I think these Groundhog Day conversations are actually our indicators that something's stuck. And so if you can relate in any way to that, this is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about how to read the room and how you can catch sight of those moments when conversations become stuck so that you can intervene, whether you're a coach, a facilitator, just a leader, intervene to change the nature of the outcome of the conversation. So just a really quick note about me. My name is Marsha Acker. I often say I came to this work that I do through a very circuitous route. I started as a software engineer by training and sort of first career. And then about 25 years ago, made a switch to working with change in organizations that led me down this path of being completely fascinated about behavior change, sustainable change, how we bring about change when we're working. And today I'm a certified professional coach and facilitator. I work with leadership teams primarily to help them, to teach them some of the things that we're going to talk about today, but also to help them kind of break out of patterns that really get them stuck in a place where that holds them back in many ways. Broken partnerships, divisions that don't speak to one another. And I really believe that being able to have skillful conversations and facilitate are just the most foundational leadership skills that we could have today. I think navigating everything that we're doing. So I'm super excited to be here today. I want to start by sharing with you a story, a brief story. This is one of my Groundhog Day conversations. So when my daughter Lauren was very young, we used to have a Groundhog Day conversation that I call "Get Your Shoes On, Please." And we'd have this conversation anytime that we were getting ready to leave the house and go someplace that Lauren didn't really want to go. And often we were in a hurry. And it would go a little bit like this: Lauren, do you have your shoes on? No. Please get them on. We need to leave for the bus in 10 minutes. Okay. 5 minutes later, Lauren, are your shoes on? No. What are you doing? Playing. We need to leave in 2 minutes and you need to get your shoes on now. Okay. 2 minutes later, I'm heading out the door. Lauren, let's go. The bus is here. And a loud cry comes from the other end of the hall. But wait, I need to get my shoes on. And I'm telling you, so I get every time I tell that story, I can get hooked by the frustration that was that conversation. And this was our stuck pattern. So our topic was about shoes and getting ready for the bus. But our structure was that I would make a move telling her to get her shoes on, and she would follow by saying, okay. But it's really a covert oppose because she doesn't intend to get her shoes on. So in this case, she's voiced an action that is different from her intention. And just a prelude, she is not the only one. Many of us do this. So my all-time favorite quote comes from the Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw when he says the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. I know that we think that we are communicating, but often consciously or unconsciously, we're doing something else in that conversation. And in my experience, sort of the very root of some of our challenges is how we are or are not having that conversation that gets in our way. And I think for many of us, leaders in particular, we sort of group communication in this topic of like soft and touchy, feely types of conversations, and that it's not really something that we would necessarily spend a lot of time skill building. I think many times because we already feel like we know how to do it. And yet, I believe we experience these kinds of conversations every day, personally with the groups we work in, at home. So I'd really like to invite you, if you've got a pen and a piece of paper nearby, grab that because I'd like you to make some notes as we go along today. Many of us have Groundhog Day conversations. What is your Groundhog Day conversation? So your version of please put your shoes on. And it might occur with your team, it might occur at home. And then it would be helpful as you make some notes, even if you want to type into the chat your headline, like your headline story about what's your Groundhog Day conversation. So take just a moment, make some notes. You can come back to it a little bit later. But what is your Groundhog Day conversation? And then maybe just have a few folks share. All right. Yeah, Christopher, we were just talking about that before we got started. Yes, finishing task. Okay, so make some notes, even if you don't want to share it. We're going to come back to it in a little bit. Please come to refinement. Yes. Okay. Um, so as a facilitator or a leader or coach, what do we do when our teams get stuck? Well, we read the room and help the team change the outcome. And so I have a couple of goals for us today. One, I want to introduce you to the first, to structural dynamics and the first level of action stances in structural dynamics that gives us some language for being able to read the room. Second, I want to introduce you to the four actions. And then third, a way to think about identifying what is your most frequent action. What's the one that we all will have at least one or two that we do most often? And then fourth, how do I change the conversation that I'm either facilitating or that I'm a participant in? So in either direction, there will be actions that you can take to help you think differently about changing the outcome. And much like any of this work, our ability to do this in teams starts with ourselves first. So today is designed to be a little bit more reflective about how we show up in those conversations. All right, so let's do some terminology for a moment because I think um, uh, reading the room can have and mean many different things. So even if you make some notes in your on your sheet of paper about when you hear the phrase "read the room," like what comes to mind for you, because I think we would use that to mean lots of different things. And there's a very specific way to think about it that I'm going to share with you today. So, as a facilitator, one of the most powerful things we can do with groups that we're collaborating with is to help them move forward by putting our facilitator hats on for a moment and thinking about when we think about leadership and setting direction and decision making, we can get very caught up in thinking about the content. But I think that's really not very helpful from that space of reading the room. So when we put our facilitator hats on, we start to think about how a group is working versus what they're saying. And our focus becomes a bit more on group dynamics and structure, the how, and we let the group hold the process or hold the content that they're thinking about. So the way that starts to look is that content is the subject that the group is talking about. Group process includes things like room setup, creating the agreements, designing how we're going to get the task oriented process, how we're going to help the group achieve those outcomes. Group dynamics will be things like who's in the room, the rank and power, dynamics and energy and relationships. And then structure and tone will be how we are speaking and communicating with one another and the manner in which we're speaking. So there's actually quite a lot that's happening, quite a lot of things to pay attention to when we're thinking about reading the room. And of all of these, structure is the greatest predictor of the outcome of the meeting. So if we're able to look at the structural patterns in a group and we're able to notice when a group is moving forward in a healthy dialogue or when they're getting stuck in this sort of groundhog day conversation, then we're able to start to change the nature of the outcome. So for me, when I use the phrase read the room, what I mean is separating the what from the how and focusing attention on structure. And I'm going to give you some language for that today. And then helping to make the structure more visible to the group so that the group or the facilitator can take action on it. But when it's more visible, somebody can take action. So a little bit of background, structural dynamics is a theory of face-to-face communications. It was developed by David Cantor, and David began his work back in the 1970s as a clinical psychologist, working at Harvard and Boston. And he conducted in situ studies of 9 families where this was pre-AI, folks, where they recorded every sentence of conversation in those families and then they began to study what happened in the conversation. And then in the early 90s, David worked with Chris Argyris, Peter Senge, Don Schoen, Bill Isaacs, Ed Sheen, and translated that family systems work into systems work, organizational systems work with leaders and teams. And what emerged from both parts of those studies was a universal theory of the structure of communications. And it says that communication can actually be deliberate and that you can design your conversations to generate success or failure. I think that's pretty cool. So there were a couple of takeaways about the theory. The first one was from the research that structure determines the performance or the outcome of a conversation. So just like the structure of a riverbed, like the turns and the rocks and the crevices determine how fast or slow water flows, structure of our conversations can actually determine the performance as well. And then the second part of this theory is that there exist two realities in every conversation. In this picture, you see two people having a conversation, and there's what they're saying, which will be a bit more visible. It'll be the speech acts that are making up the behavior in the room. But then there is a largely unconscious structure to all human verbal exchanges that is invisible. And it's the structure that affects this invisible part that really starts to affect our outcome. So if structure determines performance and there are visible and invisible realities, then these findings came together in David's theory like this, that there are three levels of structure that determine performance. So we often say context matters. So the team that you're in, the organization that you're in, the geography that you sit in, all of that determines the outcome of the performance of conversation. So there's the broader social structures. What organization do I work in? What's their culture like? What industry are we in? What's the geographical location? What's the business environment? All of those things are sort of the broader social structures. Then there is face-to-face structure. That's when we are in a conversation, whether it's virtual like this or whether it's face-to-face. But it's the verbal exchanges, the actions that we speak face-to-face that is the most visible. And then there are deeper individual structures. I often say you can think about it as if you imagine underneath your chair, under your feet, standing in a room, there are the mental models that we bring in, the beliefs, and most importantly, our identity forming stories, or what we refer to as childhood stories and structural dynamics. And all of those play a part in the behavior that we're seeing in the room in the moment. And the whole intent of structural dynamics is that by making the invisible more visible, by being able to see it and name it, we can then work to shift it. So we can shift and change the outcome. Because if it remains invisible, it tends to undermine what we're trying to accomplish, the conversations that we're trying to have. And what we end up doing, we do things like talk past one another, we talk over one another, or we get stuck in a pattern. And sometimes it's really hard to catch sight of the pattern until it starts repeating itself. So that's a bit of the context. And then just to focus in for today, we're going to look just at these face-to-face structures, and we're not going to tackle the other things. And within the face-to-face structures, so there's just one more layer of levels, and then we're going to dive in. In face-to-face structures, there are actually four levels, the way that we can look at conversations. So in the first level, they're the action modes. This is what we commonly call the four-player model. And these actions refer to the vocal acts, the sentences that we speak when we're interacting. So I'm doing a lot of vocal acts right now, and you guys aren't doing very many of them, but that'll change a little bit later. The second level is communication domains, and these are the words that we use that actually point to things that matter to us. They're the issues that we gravitate towards. There are three of these, three different communication domains: meaning, affect, and power. Meaning is about purpose and sense making. Affect is about care and concern for others, and power is about taking action. The third level is operating systems. So these are the rules that govern how we engage with others. There is open, closed, and random. Open is about hearing from others. So facilitated processes are very open system. Closed is about structure. It looks for single decision maker. Repeatability, closed system values repeatability. And then in random system, there is an orientation to autonomy. Random is actually the place of innovation and creativity. So in each of these, we need all of the communication domains, operating systems, and action modes to be in play in conversations in order for them to be effective. And anytime we get stuck in any one of them or overuse one of them, that's where breakdowns start to happen. And then the fourth level is what we call childhood story. These are our origin stories, and they are the source of what raises the stakes for us individually, and often where much of our conflict with others manifests from. So when you combine all of this together, it enables us to actually look at conversation in a morally neutral way. So I might, for example, be able to, if I said something like, I need to clear out all the items, uh, actually, if I said, I need all of the items cleared out of the backlog by the end of next week, we could call it a structure of move enclosed power. Or I could say, I'm stressed about work next week. We've been asked by leadership to clear the backlog by Friday. How are we going to get that done? That would be more of a bystand and open power. So we're not going to totally unpack all of that today. I just want you to have a sense of what structural dynamics does. It's probably one of the most complete ways I've encountered to kind of give name to the complexity and the depth of our communications with one another. But today, what I want to do is dig into this first level of action modes, because I believe this is probably one of the easiest places to get started and to be able to take some meaningful action to help apply this to conversations that you might be having, particularly those Groundhog Day conversations. So I'm going to give you some language, and I'll invite you to notice if you start to put some value judgments around them as I say the words or how we think about the actions, because sometimes it can be really easy to think about, oh, I would give that a different word, or that doesn't sound like it would be valuable to me. So just notice any of those judgments that you might place. I think another distinction is to be thinking about these as action acts, speech acts, and they are behavior. They are not personality preference. They're not a role that you play. It's none of that. It is behavior. It's action in the moment. It is what we are actually doing. And while we can have a preference for something, we have the ability to bring a different behavior in the moment. So I just want to give you some guidance around hearing these different words. So let's dive in. So the first one is move. Move actually, and I often say it's like pointing. It sets a direction, it initiates an idea or an action in communication. And essentially we need moves just to get conversations started. So oftentimes if someone is the first to speak, they're setting a direction and they're making a move. That's not the only move that we'll have, but that's move sets direction. So the next one is follow, and follow gets behind or supports the direction that's been set. And then the third is oppose. So oppose offers correction. I often say it's that one that's like, oh no, hold on, wait a minute. But it challenges or it disagrees with an idea or an action, or it pushes back, and it offers correction or an alternative perspective. And then the fourth one is bystand. And a bystand notices, it articulates awareness, it adds a neutral perspective, often for the good of the team or the people that are involved in the conversation. And it helps us to see what's happening in the conversation, or um, it might be naming a feeling that you're having, it might be naming something that you're curious about or that you're inquiring about. So here's the thing. What I think is really interesting is that everything that we say can be coded into one of these four actions. And we need all four of these actions to be present in order to have an effective dialogue. And so what's happening between bystand and follow, those are the two actions of inquiry. And move and oppose are the actions of advocacy. And we need both. We need both inquiry and advocacy in order for the conversation to be effective. So here's what that might look like. And what I'm going to invite you to do is take that blank piece of paper that you have sitting hopefully beside you. And I'm going to ask you to code. Okay, I figured out this box is on my screen. But let's just take a quick practice at coding this conversation. So each one of these sentences should be, or is, not should be, is either a move, a follow, an oppose, or a bystand. So just take a moment and see if you can identify what these 6 speech acts are in this very tiny conversation. Okay, let's see how you did. So the first one, let's meet for coffee next week, would be a move, right? It's initiating direction in the conversation. Next week is out for me is an oppose. It's pushing back. Yeah, Andrew, nodding your head. Yep, it's saying nope, won't work. What about the following week is another move? And then, yes, that works for me, right? So that's a follow. It's getting behind and supporting the new move that's just been made. Where would you like to go is a bystand. So that's if you think about the question, it's not agreeing, it's not opposing, and it's not really introducing a new topic or a new part of the conversation. It's simply inquiring. And so bystands are morally neutral. They shouldn't be doing any of the other actions. And then the last one is let's go to the shop on the corner, which is another move. Okay, so you get the concept, everything that we say, one of the 4 actions, fantastic. All right, so here's a quick self-assessment, which I think is helpful. And in order to do this, 1, you need to be really honest with yourself. And 2, you need to think about different context. So back to what I said earlier, context matters. So if you work on 3 different teams at work, you need to think about one of those teams because our behavior can change in different systems when we are with different people. Context matters. So just think about real briefly what percentage, so think about a team, or if you want to think about home, you can do that too. What percentage of your time do you spend putting forth ideas, directions, or positions for others to consider? And then what percentage of your time do you spend offering support or following through on ideas or decisions that others have put forth? What percentage of your time do you spend challenging and enhancing ideas or positions that are proposed by others? And what percentage of your time do you spend offering observations, perspectives or perspectives that bridge competing ideas? And then I'm curious if maybe if we could have folks share in the chat just briefly. What's the action, what's the one action that you believe is the most used for you? And you don't need to share what context. Yeah, move or bystand depending on context, yeah, for sure. Move and follow equally. Yes. And so for those of you who are putting 2 down, that's quite common that you might have 1 or 2 of these actions that you do more frequently, and you will likely have 1 action that you use least. In other words, if you were to stack rank them, it's sort of the last one that you would go to. Nice, Emily. Yeah. Perfect. Okay, fantastic. All right, so hold on to that piece because we're going to keep layering in some new things to think about. All right, so here's the interesting part, right? If we need all four of those actions to be voiced in a conversation in order for the conversation to be effective, then what's the problem? Why don't we just voice all four and be done with it? Well, that's because we're human and often we get stuck in patterns with one another. So I'm going to go over a couple of common stuck patterns that start to emerge, and we'll talk about how some of these have come to be for us. So the first one is serial moves. So serial moves, what's really fascinating about these is that they create a lot of energy in the conversation. So if you've ever been in a team conversation, these meetings will have a feeling like they move really fast. It feels like lots of topics get covered, and then you walk out of the meeting and you turn around and you think, "Hmm, so I'm not exactly sure what we just accomplished or agreed to." That is a really good indicator that serial moves is showing up as a pattern in your team conversation. And you'll know it because it does feel quite fast paced. But what's missing in this pattern is that there is a need for more bystand and follow. So what I mean by that is, as a facilitator, it might sound something like this. I might say, hold on just a moment. I noticed that we have four topics on the table. So we've talked about prioritization, the picnic next Tuesday, this and this. And I'm wondering which of those you want to work on first. So that's me as a facilitator making a bystand, naming that we've got four topics, and I'm prompting the group to follow one of the moves that they've already made. Otherwise, what happens is I like to think of them as it's almost a little bit like juggling a bunch of balls. And then what happens is the balls get tossed up in the air and then they drop to the floor and they roll off to the corner and they don't ever get picked up the rest of the meeting. And so you'll walk out thinking, well, hey, wait a minute. I know we talked about that, but I don't I think that rolled off to the corner. So it can create a real sense of like we're moving through things, but teams that experience serial moving can become really frustrated over time, or they can start to um, um, it becomes exhausting is the word I was looking for. So some of the unconscious mindset that sits underneath a pattern like this is some thinking. This is common thinking. Like my value in this group is demonstrated by my ability to put forth ideas. Or I need to keep the conversation moving because I'm really uncomfortable with silence and I think it's unproductive. Or if I don't provide the answers, then I won't be seen as the leader or the subject matter expert. Like I will be seen as not fit or qualified to do my job. Or here's another one. If I don't like an idea that's been put out, instead of saying I don't like it, opposing, I'll just change the subject and introduce a new subject. So I share that with you because I'm inviting you into some reflection about if that's a pattern, thinking about where some of that thinking might be showing up for you or where you suspect it might be showing up for someone else. Okay, so here's the next one. Courteous compliance is the next type of pattern. I'm certain we've all experienced this one. It's where a move is made and then there's lots of follow behind it. Now, I often say if we're deciding where we want to go for lunch, this can be really helpful. If we are deciding what color t-shirts we want to buy, it's fine. But right where this actually starts to show up as a pattern, it's not fine. And there can feel like, I often say, early on in my, way early on in my facilitation career, I used to say, silence is consent. So I would say to you today, silence means a lot of things. Consent is not one of them. So a lot of times, there can be this people complain, certainly in the virtual world, that it feels like if someone makes a move and nobody says anything, we're just going to move on. And then there's sort of this idea that we think people are silently following. I'll tell you, they're silently doing something, but following is likely not it. So the mindset here is sometimes you'll hear people say, just tell me what you want me to do. Or can't we just can't we just move along and get along? I don't really want to rock the boat, or I don't feel like we have time, or I'm not sure the juice is worth the squeeze. I don't really feel like staying in this conversation any longer. Even things like, well, I've tried to offer a different point of view before and it didn't go so well for me. So my role is just to comply. So just tell me what you want me to do. So folks, none of that thinking is helpful or productive to an effective conversation. And it will likely be another signal or a flag that your conversations are stuck in some way. Like you might be having Groundhog Day conversations. Um, the place, what's needed in the move and follow is that we really need to activate the oppose. And one of the best ways to invite a pose into a conversation is to actually bystand first. So you might say something like, I'm noticing there's a lot of silence and I'm wondering who disagrees. Or I'm noticing that we've got a move on the table, or we've got the idea on the table if I want to drop the structural language, and there's a lot of alignment. But I want to test who sees this as a challenge or who sees this as a risk. So as a facilitator, you can start to prompt for the voice that's missing from that conversation. So activating the oppose, and we do that a lot through the action of bystand, inquiring or prompting a group. So the next pattern that can emerge is called point counterpoint. This is another way to think about this is a group is stuck in advocacy. And if you've ever been in one of those conversations or you've facilitated one of those conversations, it can feel like what happens in advocacy is 2 points of view get stated, and then both sides kind of dig their heels in and they're not going anywhere. So the action is someone's made a move and someone has voiced an oppose, and unless somebody brings a bystander or a follow, folks, that conversation isn't going anywhere. So if I make a move and I say, hey, I think we need to switch out all of our computers and change them from Macs to PCs, and someone else says, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, not going to do it. Well, if there's nothing else that enters that conversation, we're just going to keep going back and forth. I think we need to do it. I disagree. So, what's helpful and needed in this conversation is we need more follow and bystand. I often tell leaders who are working on bringing clear opposition that one of the best ways you can do that is to actually start with a bystand and follow. So, if I were the one saying, hey, I think we need to switch out all of our Macs from our PCs, then if I'm opposing that, if I just were to start with a bystand, so I'm, hey, Marcia, I really, let me follow first because I might say, I really am aligned with your commitment to keep us technically up to date. That's actually a value that I share as well. I'm noticing, my bystand might be, I'm noticing that the investment for that and the time commitment would be huge. I am opposed, I disagree with doing that all at once. My new move, I could get on board with that if we were to do it in chunks, or I would support that if we looked at at a different rollout plan. So a lot of times what's happening when someone is stuck in the advocacy, the move and the oppose, is that they're pushing back entirely. And sometimes to be fair to the person who's opposing, sometimes it's maybe not even clear for them what they see or what they know out in the larger world, and maybe even what's the tiniest thing, even 2% that they could follow or support from the proposal that's been made. So helping someone who's stuck in this point counterpoint by first looking for the bystand and the follow, and then the clear oppose and a new move on top of that sets a team up for really effective oppose. And we need oppose. So sometimes that's the one that's, the action that can be missing the most. The fourth pattern that happens is what we call hall of mirrors. And so, if you've ever been with a team who's really frustrated about something and you notice they come into a conversation and they're just complaining, this isn't working, that's not working. So sometimes that can be a little bit of a hall of mirrors. Or you can have a team sitting back going, I'm noticing this, I'm noticing that. A group of coaches is really good for lots of bystanding, like noticing things. But what's needed in the hall of mirrors is eventually, so that's fine, we can have a lot of context, or we can do a lot of griping and complaining. And then what we need is a move. So the move will be the action that will give this pattern some direction so that others can either get in and follow it or oppose it. But the bystand overdone you can get stuck. Okay, so here's the thing. Move, follow, and bystand also can become replacements for what we call the covert oppose. So if you have serial moves or courteous compliance or hall of mirrors, you also have covert opposition. So remember my story at the very beginning with my daughter and Lauren and I in our stuck conversation where I'd make a move and then she would follow. She'd say okay, but she would do a no. She wouldn't put her shoes on. That was her oppose. It just didn't get voiced. And this can be the pattern in our teams for lots of reasons. They can be cultural reasons for us, they can be in our culture, they can be how we were raised, experiences of the past, previous opportunities or jobs where we tried it and it didn't go so well. So when oppose is low in a system, it means sometimes that it's been trained out of us in some way. Like we believe it's not our role, or we believe it's impolite, or we believe it would be a career limiting move. And sometimes it can just be, I want to get it done. I don't want to, it's a little bit back to that, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. Or I'm afraid that I will not be liked if I really bring that in. So there can be all kinds of reasons why oppose kind of goes offline. We talk about it as going underground, where it actually does more harm than good. So when it goes out of the room or it gets voiced, at the water cooler or over a text or a Slack message, anything that's sort of off channel or it kind of goes underground and it does a lot more harm. So when any of these actions are missing, we need someone to bring the action or call for the action that's missing and invite it. So as leaders or facilitators, here's some ways to think about this. Serial moves or point counterpoint need more follow and bystand. Courteous compliance needs oppose. Covert opposition needs a bystand and an opportunity to bring more of that oppose, even just to invite it, specifically to invite it. And then here's the kicker. When an oppose gets voiced, think about how you follow it. So a lot of times when someone pushes back and says, I disagree, I don't want to do that, we do things like put it in the parking lot or tell the person that that's a conversation for a later day, or we'll address that sometime later. And I think that's another behavior that actually sends oppose out of the room and underground. And so a lot of times when the oppose gets voiced, the job is to inquire. Can you say more about that? Oh, fascinating. Tell me more. What's that like? What are you seeing from your perspective? So when it gets voiced, our job becomes to follow it. So in my conversation with my daughter, our pattern was really courteous compliance. So she'd voice a follow. It was not her intent, and yet I didn't go home to her. She was much younger at that time, and just so we're all clear, um, she's 15 now, and there's really no trouble with oppose being voiced in our house. In case anybody was worrying, as a parent, I feel like my husband and I have done a fabulous job at teaching her the skill of oppose. So she's all good in that department. But earlier on, what I didn't go home and say, "Hey, look, you, you need to turn that follow into an oppose." Um, but instead, what I would start to do, I started to change the way I entered that conversation with her. And I would say, hey, I'd say, are your shoes on? That was me making a move. And she would say, no, she was following. And I would say, what are you doing? My move. And she'd say, playing on the computer. What are you playing? And this is where I started to change the conversation. She'd say, I'm building a house out of blocks on the computer. Instead of making another move, I would bystand. I would just say, hey, the bus is going to be here at 7:50 to pick you up. Silence. And after a few minutes, she would start to say, I think I need to get my shoes on. And that allowed me to follow a move that she made. My daughter is, her resistance, even to this day, comes when I make all of the moves. And in the relationship with her, it can be my habit. I don't have this in other contexts, but I do have it with my daughter. I can be the one that makes a lot of moves, wanting her to follow. And even at a young age, she was not interested in that. So my goal in our conversations has been to enter the conversation in a way that allows her to make more moves that I could follow and support. She is a teenager. She's 15 now, and it can still be our pattern. And I get reminded of it every time, especially if it's something that she doesn't want to do. Every time I go to place a high value on making moves, my daughter values autonomy. She wants it to be her idea. She wants to be the one that sets some of the parameters about when it gets done. And so the more ways that I can bring curiosity, genuine, not manipulative, but genuine curiosity and inquiry into our conversations, it really does put us in a position where she makes a move that I can follow and support. It might not be my first choice, but it is one that I can get behind and support. So here are some facilitation moves to prompt for missing actions. And I see the message in the chat. So yes, I'm happy to share the slides with you. Um, but if you're noticing that moves are missing, you might say something like, what would you add? So every time, folks complain that people are quiet, this is a nice sort of chart to keep in mind or keep handy. Things that you start to notice are missing, rather than calling on people, you can just start to ask people, like, what else would you add? Or what do you think is missing? Or what would you suggest? If you're prompting for follow, who agrees? What do you hear that you align with? So if you've got a team that's really, that might be very well voiced in opposition, you might prompt for more follows. If oppose is missing, then you might prompt for things like, who sees this differently? I even think it's great to do facilitated exercises where you actually ask a group to list out all the things that they think are different, um, especially if it's a pattern where oppose isn't voiced a lot. So essentially what I'm asking you to do and start thinking about is, can you take out sort of the emotion and the judgments that we all place around conversations and what people are saying, and can you start to see the structure, the action that people are making, and then can you see the action that's also missing, because that then gives you some idea about what you might prompt for in your facilitation. So in summary, reading the room. First is to create a shared language with your team. So you don't need to do a 45-minute overview. You could simply do a 2-minute introduction to the 4-player model. You can draw it on a board, you can give them a handout, you can tell folks about the actions, and then you can help the team start to see, like you can help start to code. So you might just name things in the moment. The second step to this is separating the what from the how. So you've really got to delineate what the team is talking about versus how, the structure that they're using to talk about it, and place your attention on the structure. So can you code what's happening? You can't, it's hard to code the whole conversation, especially if you're also facilitating. But when you start to notice a team getting stuck, or you're having one of those Groundhog Day conversations, can you start to code what's happening? You might even fade to the side for just a minute so that you can get a you can get a hypothesis of what might be happening. And then help make the structure more visible to the group. So can you name, I'm noticing we've got 4 moves on the table, or I'm noticing we haven't heard any opposition. We've got courteous compliance. So you don't necessarily have to use the lingo that I've introduced to you. You can use that as kind of a mental model, but you can use it as a way to help a team, to help prompt action from a team. The QR code, if you want to you can have these slides. I'll give them to Christopher and he can post them. We also have a illustrated guide on changing stuck patterns, so you can follow that QR code, and it's also for free. So I don't know if many of you remember, it's been a number of years ago that Google did a study. They set out to discover what makes teams effective at Google. And what the research showed was that what really mattered was less about who's on the team and more about how the team worked together. So in other words, how do we communicate with one another? Can I say what I really think? Will my contributions be heard and valued? Am I able to offer new ideas and push back on someone else's idea? Am I able to push back on the leader's idea? And is there even a space created for us to slow down and have those kinds of conversations? So I think that this is so important to the work that we do as facilitators. And look, I love facilitation tools. I love collaboration boards and games and icebreakers and sticky notes and dot votes. I think they are all valuable and helpful. And I think we've reached the place where sometimes we rely too heavily on all of those things, and we're missing an opportunity as leaders and facilitators to help groups get beyond the surface level conversations that we have a lot. Those are the conversations that we repeat. We find ourselves coming back to those same conversations because we don't get to the deeper conversation. So a lot of times we do a lot of sticky note activities, but we don't slow down enough to look at what is the meaning behind what someone wrote on the sticky note. So I'm not suggesting that every conversation needs to be like that, but I am suggesting that we need to have places where we do slow down, where we get to a deeper level conversation, where we look at structure. And I think as leaders, we need to actively be engaging in the deeper conversations if we're expecting change in our teams. And we want to start to change behavior, like change in workflow, change in our outcomes, change in the way that we're having conversations. I often think about, this first step in finding these Groundhog Day conversations, I think starts with reflection. So I want to invite you to take out your notes. Like if you made some notes about your Groundhog Day conversation, I know some of you put them in the chat. And I want you to think about what is the conversation that you want to change. And I would encourage you to pick just one. So start here. And I will create a little bit of space now where we might have maybe some conversations here. Like if you want to share your conversation and even just share some of the reflections that you've had. But think about even later today or maybe tomorrow morning where you can start to code your conversation like I did with my daughter. Like what's the move? Is there a follow? Has there been an oppose? Has someone done a bystand? And then can you start to catch sight of the pattern? And then what's the action that's missing? And most importantly, what's something that you could do to change that conversation? So I don't think that this is about developing a list of things that others could do, even though that's likely more fun to develop the list. But what's the list or what's the action that you could bring that's missing? And I think that feeling of, getting overwhelmed or stuck or feeling like we're blocked in some way doesn't have to become a source of frustration anymore. I actually think it's a moment for observation. I think of them as like whatever metaphor, the canary in the coal mine, or it's the yellow warning flag that goes up. And it's just simply a signal that something is missing from the conversation. And if you can locate the structure of it, there will be a way to move forward. So I think that this sort of skill set of being able to read the room is really important to being able to intervene in conversations that are happening. So I'll with that, I'll sort of end for here today and we'll just open up the conversation if there's questions or anything that you want to bring forward or share or even talk about. We can do a little bit of time there. So yeah, I'll stop
I
sharing.
see some typing happening. Perhaps someone's sharing an example.
Mm. Take care, Michael.
So we've got one saying, our founders, so we all need to do these things now
Mm.
after discussing how the COP could possibly be done. And also this should be done. Drea saying that the session was very useful.
This is a reminder.
Mm. Emily, great question. Can you are you willing to say a little bit more about your question? Do you think moves work differently in person compared to virtually?
Absolutely. So we're international company. We have predominantly work online in teams. We're thrown together on various different things. Unfortunately, I think somebody's already mentioned it. Culturally, the psychological safety is missing, and I
Yeah.
wonder if are we a lost cause, or
Mm.
actually is it if you get in person, virtual becomes a bit
Mm.
easier. Do you need different techniques, or should you try and not think of it in that way and just be like, well, I'm the facilitator. I need to step in and ask those questions wherever I am.
Yeah. You're pointing to so many good things. I think I'll tell you how I think about it or approach it. Yes, psychological safety is a key part of it. And um, this is simply me, so it's not the only way or necessarily the right way. It is just how I think about it. I think psychological safety sometimes becomes a difficult concept for teams to get their arms around. So I often go to structure as a way to signal and help a team see where they might be bringing or overusing one action versus another. And a lot of times, if safety is missing, yes, people will hold back from making moves, or they won't, or they certainly won't offer opposition. And I think it's a combination of helping them notice that that's missing for them. And then, yes, spending time doing some of the things that we know help teams build more safety. I think there's no replacement for being in person, even in the virtual world. There's nothing. I just 3 months ago actually was with a team who had not been together since prior to the pandemic. It was the first time that they were coming back all together as a co-located leadership team, and they spent 4 days together. and there will be nothing that replace, there was definitely some shifts in terms of them making, and they've gone back to being, more dispersed and virtual. So
Mm.
I think it's a combination of all of those, and I tend to
Yeah.
find it easier to help a team see it by looking at structure first.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question.
What do we do when there's apathy from Yelena?
Mm. Um, I think there's lots of reasons for apathy. Again, I tend to help a team. I want a team to look at it from a systemic point of view. So I think that asking people what, if you can help them see the structure, or you help them, or you're able to see a pattern that's coming in the conversation. I think talking to people one-on-one about what's creating that for them, what it's like. I ask questions like, what's it like to be in a conversation in this team? And what do you find easy to, about being in conversation? And what's really challenging or difficult? So I'm often asking teams to think about, what is it like for us to communicate with one another, so that I can begin to help them see some of that. I think when people become apathetic, there is oftentimes they've experienced some version of not feeling heard and understood. And at least in our practice at Team Catapult, that actually sits at the core of everything that we do, is building the skills on a team for people to feel heard and understood, because we hold that change doesn't happen until that takes place. And so until we've built enough rapport, relationship, container building, skill building around communication is one way we help teams sort of actively do that, so that they can be sort of measuring their progress. But until that happens, yes, I think people will be apathetic. I think all the dysfunctional or toxic behaviors that we talk about in meetings show up, where people don't participate, or they just want it to go away. So it looks like, is there someone in the queue? Sure.
Yes, so we have Shock is in the queue.
Nice.
Hi, yes. Thanks for a really interesting session. So I'll give you context and then my question. So what I'm understanding from this, and I think is brilliant, it's something we have to sort of start to do and practice and make mistakes with, etc. And I'm wondering, in the analogy you've used as your daughter when she was younger, I've got a 6-year-old, so it resonates. Is there an element, as one develops one's skills and practice in this, of choosing your battles? And what I mean by that is you might want to, I'm thinking, okay, let me start to develop and use this and read the structure around these conversations better, at least at this basic level. But then is there another level of, and when should I use and think about activating some of the things that I might consider to be missing, if it's important? Is that a factor with you being so obviously deeply skilled in using this?
Can you say that again?
So if I was to develop skills at reading the different parameters, another level would be also choosing when to use it, because I'm thinking about the comments the previous person made about culture and context. And so when would it be, or when and how should I go about making a judgment to use it and not to use it? Is that a factor? I'm sort of thinking ahead. I'm thinking about how I delve into this. Please share.
Yeah, it's a really great question. So for me, I wrote a whole book about this. So what I would say is, I think it depends on your model for how you work with teams. And I'll offer what I do in my model, and I'm not asserting at all that it's the only way to work. There are, at this point, so I have been working with structural dynamics since about 2015. But at this point, structural dynamics is so core to how I coach leaders, coach individuals, work with teams, facilitate. So anytime I am working with anybody in that context, I am always hearing it through the lens of what's the pattern and the structure. Now, how much I do with the team, so I'm always thinking about it. How much I do with the team and how much intervention I do is very much informed for me by what I've, what's going to be my relationship with them. Is this going to be a 6 month long thing that they're actually actively working on developing as a team? Or is it simply a 1 day, 3 hour in and out thing, in which case it's going to be super light touch? I might do, like I said to you, I might say, here's a 4 player model, and I'm noticing this is happening. Or all the way up to the place where it's an active part of how I'm helping the team think and work together, and it's a way that they're doing. So I don't know if that answers the question entirely. I think that it absolutely matters to be thinking about how you work with teams and what's your model for teams, how you think teams develop and change best, um, and the way that you would bring that kind of work in with the team. Is that helpful at all, Ashok?
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, that's set me on a great path. Thank you very much.
Nice.
Isn't it like that in the beginning we're going to be more on the observation side? What I had in mind is like the common stack patterns. This
Yes.
is kind of my cheat sheet I put beside me,
Yes.
and see how my team, if I can find these patterns in my team, and then I have these beautiful prompts in there where I can raise my hand and say, listen, guys,
Yes.
what do you think?
I think that's a great way.
So, and then you get used to it. And I think the more we observe and we really compare, we get more, how do you say, self-conscious?
Yes. Yes. Self-aware.
Self-aware, thank you. And
yeah.
Yeah.
Self-aware and other-aware. And so, Andrea, I think it's a great way of doing it. Any way that you can get started. This is it does take some skill building. I think about it as like building muscles, even for us, that we've got to start somewhere. And so if you can, even if you can take meetings that you're participating in and not facilitating, that's an easy place to start, because it does allow you to sort of fall, you can kind of fall back a step from being in the fray of the conversation, and you can create a little bit of brain space for yourself to start to code what's happening in the conversation and see things. So you might take different actions. So I think it's a great place to start.
Yeah,
and yes, the more confidence you build.
And it's kind of learning a new language, right?
It is.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, Martha. You're welcome. Let's see.
It seems there's lots of just people saying how useful they found the session. It's giving them new things to think about. There's another story about, or a particular scenario, a conversation from a parent. What have you been up to or doing that someone naturally opposes to?
Yes.
And Elaine has a question. How do you explain your role and purpose to a team that doesn't want to cooperate because all is working well?
Then I would say, if all is working well, there's no need. I'm a big believer in the power. I sort of don't like that word in this context, but it's true, right? So as certainly in the role of facilitator, you do have, you can have a process power over a group, but I'm a big believer in that that power needs to be granted to me from the group. So if I've been asked to come in and work with a group doing facilitation, I'm often asking them ahead of time, like, what do you want to get out of this session? How would it be useful? What would be the best way for you to spend your time? What do you notice in your team that you need to talk about but you're not talking about? So those are some of the kind of pre-work questions that I would often ask. And if someone says, we just need someone to help keep us on track or help keep us in the right conversation, we don't need everything else is going fine, I'd be like, fantastic, then let's do that. And then I would just simply be listening. So I would still be listening for the patterns. And then I might share what I'm hearing. But if there's no desire in the group to do that kind of work, then I think that's your answer. Like I don't think that well, you can do anything that you want, but I'm not a fan of wanting development or improvement for a team more than it wants it for itself. And it's an easy trap to fall into. I do it all the time.
What's the Esther Darby quote? She says something along the lines of, "Don't inflict your help upon people."
Yeah, I would agree. I love that phrase. I think you have to enroll people, and it has to come from them about what they need or what they want. Yeah.
Matthew says, if they aren't experiencing any pain, they won't be receptive to change.
There's the next level down in structural dynamics where we get into power, affect, and meaning helps with this one a little bit around pain, and the operating systems. So thinking about helping a group, when a team is experiencing pain, I often move to an open system process, and I look for ways in which affect may or may not be showing up in the conversation. A lot of times, teams that are experiencing pain but not talking about it because there's some rule about that's not appropriate for work. There's some narrative that sits in there about that. It will hold a team quite stuck in that way. So that's just another way of, I think, about using structure.
All right, conscious of time, folks, I have enabled the reactions. So give Marsha some love, some appreciation, please, for her great session today. I personally enjoyed this one. If you press reactions, you can either do the emoji reactions, you can type in the chat your experiences, or you can use those sounds. As has been alluded to, the recording will go on the YouTube channel if you want to catch up on this later. Marsha's kindly shared that she will pass on the materials from today, so I can ensure those get emailed out to you so you can refer back to these afterwards. Coming up soon, we have some other great guest speakers. Jim Highsmith, one of the authors of the Agile Manifesto. We have Martin Dalmeen, who's not long written a book about sprint goals, and more coming. So we do look forward to seeing you at a future session. Thank you again for being here with us today. Thank you again, Marsha, for taking us through some dynamics there for enabling outcomes to improve in meetings and reading the room. See you all next time, gang.
Thanks, everyone.